The Mets got their ace. They acquired Freddy Peralta and Tobias Myers from the Brewers in exchange for prospects Jett Williams and Brandon Sproat. Seems like a pretty nice haul, at least from my perspective. Chris might not agree. We'll get to that in a little bit. But just 1 year of Peralta, so I thought that the Brewers did pretty well here. The Mets needed pitching desperately, obviously. Peralta is coming off one of the best seasons of his career, 2.70 ERA, 108 WHIP. But it feels like he overperformed a bit. We've talked about that a lot this offseason. Scott, do you think this move changes the value at all for Freddy Peralta in 2026?
No, I don't think it changes it, but it needs to change, and it needs to change down. To get into it more, so 2022, 2023, 2024, the 3 years prior to last year, he had an ERA in the 3.6 to 3.8 range. Pretty steady there with that ERA, high threes. Last year it was 270. So it dropped by like a full run last year for Freddy Peralta, even though strikeout rate, the same. Walk rate, the same. Ground ball rate, the same. Fly ball rate, the same. Average exit velocity, the same. Everything was the same for Freddy Peralta. By the components that make up what a pitcher is, he was the same pitcher, and yet his ERA was a run lower than it always is. So the natural assumption is Freddy Peralta is going to regress by like a run this year. Now, that doesn't mean he won't be good. Mm-hmm. He's always been good in fantasy. The guy putting up the 3.6 to 3.8 ERA was very good, a top 20 to top 25 type pitcher.
Especially with 200 strikeouts every single year.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm worried now. I mean, I've been worried all along that he's going to be overdrafted, but maybe that it could be even worse now because he is the Mets. And I think it's fair to say, given the makeup of the Mets rotation now, he is the Mets ace. He is the Mets ace. He is the best, or at least the best pitcher who is established. Nolan McLean being the one I'm obliquely referencing there. The best pitcher who's established on the Mets, which would make Freddy Peralta their de facto ace. But is he an ace for fantasy purposes? No. So be careful not to inflate him. If you can get him around 20th at SP, great. I'd do that too. But you're likely to have to pay more for him than that based on his ADP.
I will say, I think the landing spot's about as good as you could hope for in getting away from a team with an elite defense and coming off a 97 win season. The Mets probably aren't going to win 97 games. Although
I don't think that they'll have an elite defense either.
I think the Mets are going to have a really good defense, actually. I think Bo Bichette's going to be fine at third base. I think Simeon and Lindor is a great middle infield. I think Luis Robert and Carson Bench are going to be a really, really good outfield pairing. I think this defense should be, I would say, top 10 in baseball. I really, Bichette doesn't have a great arm. I get that, but arm strength isn't everything. If you can handle shortstop, I think you can handle third base.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
Exactly. We've always said that.
Yeah.
I don't think the Mets are going to win 97 games like the Brewers did last season, so I don't think Freddy Peralta is going to win 17 games, but I didn't think the Brewers were going to win 97 games, and I didn't think Freddy Peralta was going to win 17 games there either. I think the Mets might be as good as the Brewers right now. Like after this trade, I think if you put their win totals up against each other, I think it'd be close to a toss-up. The Mets have had a really good offseason over the past week. You got to give them that. It started out pretty rough, but they've done a very good job making up for a bad start, and I think they're going to be better than they were last year. I think the defense is going to be good, and I think the landing spot's about as good as you could hope for.
All they needed to do was get denied or declined, I guess, by Kyle Tucker, and then they just went nuclear after that because they brought in Bo Bichette, and they traded for Luis Robert, and now traded for Freddy Peralta as well. I know this might sound to some, especially if you're a Mets fan and you're listening, like we're kind of hating on Peralta or poo-pooing him. He's a totally fine pitcher, and he's
Great.
like a solid SP2, maybe even a high-end SP2. But the way he's being drafted so far this offseason, his ADP in January is 69, and that is the 15th starting pitcher off the board. I think that is being artificially inflated because he had 17 wins last year, and he finished as a top 10 starting pitcher in fantasy. But for all the reasons you guys mentioned, the left on base percentage was very high last year. His BABIP was low. I mean, those are just kind of natural things that regress over the course of time. So I would expect like a mid-3s ERA and like a 115-ish whip and a bunch of strikeouts. And again, that's like a high-end SP2. It's just, I don't know that, he should be like a top 70 pick or a top 15 starting pitcher drafted. So,
You know what I'm really bumping up against? And I know this isn't the right way to think about it, but his ADP was last year?
It's outside the top 100, right?
It's 112. He's this, as Scott just said, he is the exact same guy he was in 2024. So he was way undervalued last year. I think he's a little bit overvalued this year. I think like if he was going around 80 or 90, love it. Great pick. As your potential ace in a 15-team league, he just does not have the volume or the elite ratios to justify it. He's a good pitcher. He pitched over his head last year.
And I've pointed this out before, especially if you're playing head-to-head points leagues where you need volume and you need quality starts and you need to go 6+ innings consistently. Freddy Peralta did that in just 13 of 33 starts last year. And it's been a consistent thing throughout his career. I mean, he gets a lot of these like 5 1/3 inning starts, 5 inning starts. He's not as efficient as he needs to be like a full-on ace for fantasy. So keep that in mind when drafting him in a head-to-head points league as well. The updated Mets rotation, by the way, Peralta up at the top. Then you have Nolan McLean. Some combination of David Peterson, Clay Holmes, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga. My guess is Jonah Tong is on the outside looking in. Mm-hmm. Towards the end of the season, looked like he needed more seasoning in the minors. So we'll see him at some point. But maybe they go with a 6-man rotation or usually these things just figure themselves out. But would you guys guess that it's like Kodai Senga also out right now with Sean Manaea and Clay Holmes in? Or
I would guess one of them if everybody stays healthy between now and opening day, which is a huge if for any team. Not picking on any Mets pitchers. It's just pitchers get hurt a lot at all times.
We should assume someone's going to get hurt in spring training.
But presuming one doesn't, I would guess that they have Clay Holmes work out of the bullpen, or maybe even Sean Manaea work out of the bullpen.
Yeah, entirely possible. So we shall see, but that is the updated Mets rotation. What about the return? The Brewers get Jett Williams and Brandon Sproat. Jett Williams, 22 years old, first-round pick back in 2022. Smaller dude, 5'7", has put up big numbers in the minors so far. Lots of OBP, some power, lots of speed. Has mostly played shortstop in the minors, but also some second base and center field. And then Sproat, a little bit older, 25 years old, second-round pick back in 2023. Had that huge 2024 season, but then got off to a very bad start last year and then picked things up in the second half of the minor league season. So, Chris, I know you didn't like this return as much. Can you see either of those players making an impact this season for the Brewers, Jett Williams or Brandon Sproat?
So, to clarify, the Brewers did fine. They got 2 top 100 prospects for a guy who wasn't going to be there next year. I think that's fine. I don't specifically like Jett Williams or Brandon Sproat is what it comes down to for me. I'm not a believer in these specific types of players. Sproat, it mostly just comes down to he's got a really bad fastball for a guy who throws 97, 98. He had a 6% whiff rate with his sinker at the major league level last season and a 6% whiff rate with his four-seamer. These are very, very small sample sizes, but those pitches didn't play well in the minors either. His changeup is reportedly pretty good. He's got a full arsenal. From what I understand, he has struggled with the right approach to take. He has also struggled with like his in-game stamina, keeping his velocity throughout the game. So the prospect people I trust tend to not be as high on Brandon Sproat. And that's been true before 2025, when he really struggled in the first half. So I think he's more of a back end type arm. I don't really like. He was talked about as like a potential high upside pitcher, but he's an old prospect. I think he's a late rotation spot guy. I don't think this is a difference maker. And then Jett Williams, I mean, this might be unfair. He gives real Kevin Biggio vibes, where the minor league numbers are really good, or at least they were last year. I know he struggled in 2024, but I worry he's on the passive side of the patience versus passive divide. His swing rate last year was only 43%. His zone swing rate was only 61%. He does not hit the ball very hard, but he does a really good job of pulling it in the air and maximizing the below average raw power that he does have. But I don't know. That feels like it could get exposed really quickly. Ironically, I think he's a lot like Caleb Durbin, actually. And not just because they're both itty-bitty guys. I think their skill sets are very similar. And, Williams was a first-round pick, and maybe there's more upside than Caleb Durbin, but I think that's the type of player I'm expecting Jett Williams to be.
So they are two flawed prospects, and they're flawed in the way that I think is most unappealing to the real analytical types. Jett Williams doesn't hit the ball very hard. Brandon Sproat doesn't miss a lot of bats, or at least this past year he didn't miss a lot of bats. And I think it's fair to say he won't miss a lot of bats at the majors either, and maybe never will be a big deal in fantasy. But what Jett Williams and Brandon Sproat also have is, I think, a workaround for that deficiency. Jett Williams' case, it's pulling the ball in the air a lot to make up for that lack of exit velocity. Maybe too much, as a matter of fact. Like, I think he's a little too, for a 5'7" guy. He should probably accept life as a guy who hits a dozen homers, and I think his overall outcomes would be better. But
I think the batting average is going to be bad as a result of that, unless that changes.
Yeah, unless that changes. Now, he hopefully would walk enough and steal enough bases to make up for it. But, I don't think he's I don't think he has a ton of upside for fantasy. And there is certainly a scenario where Jett Williams doesn't end up being a full-timer in the majors. He ends up being more of a utility guy. But he is I think the last 3 years has been a consensus top 100 guy. And he's in my top 100, which was just released earlier this week. Brandon Sproat also is. He was 93rd for me, so he's barely hanging on. And, you get to that point in the top 100, and it's like 40 different guys could go there. So I very easily could have left Brandon Sproat out of my top 100. Ultimately, he was in because of the immediacy, because he's very likely to make a contribution right now. So I give those guys an edge, especially in a fantasy-geared list like mine. The thing he does to overcome his deficiency, you're right, the fastball is terrible, and I think it got exposed even before he got to the majors. Remember, as great as he was in 2024, it collapsed once he got to AAA.
He was terrible in the first half.
And then he started out this past year terrible at AAA as well. But he did make a change. Final 11 starts. I don't know exactly when he began emphasizing the sinker more, but he started moving away from that not very good four-seamer and emphasizing a sinker more, like we saw from Edward Cabrera. And who was the other guy who did that? There was some other guy we talked about recently who did that too. Just as a way of it just works better with his arsenal, and I know in Edward Cabrera's case he was able to throw it for strikes more. Gavin Williams is the other one who was doing that. So Sproat started doing it too, more sinkers. Final 11 starts at AAA, 2.44 ERA, 0.93 WHIP, 10.7 K per nine. Gets to the majors, and what he had in common in both the majors and the minors, this is Brandon Sproat we're talking about, is so in the majors, his short time in the majors, 48% ground ball rate. Very good. At AAA, it was 53%. Awesome. his average exit velocity in both the majors and the minors was below 88 miles per hour. So weak grounders, Brandon Sproat has a track record of getting those. And that is a great trait to have as a pitcher. Now, is it going to make him a fantasy star if he doesn't have a way of missing bats? No, but I think actually I could see Brandon Sproat having an outcome of another former prospect that other organizations gave up on, and then the Brewers seemed to fix him with just Quinn Priester last year. Quinn Priester was not a fantasy stud last year, but very useful. I think in a similar way to that Sproat could be useful. The Brewers know pitching about as well as any organization, and they were willing to take a shot on this guy. So I'm keeping an open mind. I don't think Brandon Sproat should be drafted in most leagues next year, and I don't think he has a huge ceiling in fantasy, but would it surprise me if he's somebody we're picking up and streaming and finding out he's worth holding on to once we start streaming him this upcoming year? I think that's definitely a plausible scenario.
The Brewers updated rotation, by the way, without Peralta, Brandon Woodruff, Jacob Misiorowski, Quinn Priester, Chad Patrick, and my guess is it would be Logan Henderson, but Henderson dealt with either an elbow or a flexor late last year, and Woodruff obviously has a lengthy injury history as well. So if anything happens to those guys between now and the start of the season, then maybe Sproat has an opportunity very early on this year. And with Jett Williams, I'll just point out he's played 34 games at AAA. He probably starts in the minors once again, but if he gets off to a good start, it's like Jake Bauers in left field right now. So they could easily kind of shuffle things around and get Jett Williams up if he gets off to a nice start in the minors as well.